Hello everyone. Good evening. I'm sharing my screen. So let's pick it up from where we have left off in our previous session, guys. We've started off with fault handling and integrations, and we discussed what are the possible actions that the clients usually ask us to implement. And we've also seen how to send out an email notification with the fault details from a global fault handler. And we were supposed to include action 2 in the scope level fault handler, wherein we need to understand how to insert a record to ATP table. And in that session, we've also seen how to create a database in cloud, logging into OCI as an administrator. And yes, there are three types of database available in cloud. We have seen the option of creating it, and we have also seen what details we need to connect to the database from SQL Developer and OIC as well. Okay, the connection is also created if I'm not wrong. Let's quickly validate if the connection is also created here. Yeah, the ATP connection is in place and ERP connection is also pointing to the working instance at the moment. Now we just have to plug in action number 2 into the integration now. Get into it. And when you create a fault handler at a scope level, guys, yes, you go into scope and you see the fault handler. You can add in, see, you can add a fault handler. And when you add a fault handler at a scope level, there are two things that you can do. You can handle a specific exceptions raised by a journal input service, or you can configure a default handler. And when you configure a default handler, any exception that you get from a scope need not necessarily be a fault coming in from journal input service. Any other a node throwing a fault, that would still be captured if you create it as default handler. Default handler means any exception from any fault from a scope. Service exception means only if the journal input service throws a fault, it would be handled here. We have something similar in PLSQL as well, right, guys? So when you write a PLSQL procedure, what do we normally do? We would have a PLSQL blocks within it. And when you handle exceptions at a PLSQL block, we can handle specific exceptions if we want. Like we can be specific about handling exceptions. I can say handle only no data found, or too many rows found, or invalid number errors. Or we can also say when others, which means any exception that you get from this block will be captured here. When you say no data found, only when this specific exception comes from here, it would be handled here. Okay. So we normally configure default handlers, guys, so that this is like when others, it handles everything or any fault that comes from a scope. And when you create a scope level fault handler, the entire integration code goes into the background. And you also don't see, say, for example, when you create a global fault handler, there are two things that you have seen, right? So you have seen a fault node getting captured, notification sent out, and you also see a fault being returned back. But we don't have any such thing in the scope fault handler, because when you handle faults at a scope level, OIC assumes that you have done it well. And if there are any further actions in the integration, they would still be executed. So first of all, what is it that we want to do from here? I want to insert a record to ATP table. So I go to the, I use ATP connection. I use ATP connection. I use ATP connection and I say merge item details to ATP. Sorry, not item details. Insert fault details to ATP. And whenever you use a database connection, guys, it doesn't really matter whether it is a it doesn't really matter whether it is an ATP or ADW. Doesn't matter which type of database it is. You would only see three options in there. So if you want to perform an operation on a single table, you can select this operation. Okay, you can do an insert, update, delete, for other operations here. And if you want to run a SQL statement like select, update, or delete, etc., you can do so using a run a SQL statement operation. Say, for example, if you want to do updates or deletes by writing a complex SQL, not just a simple table, then you use this. And if you want to invoke a stored procedure, you don't and if you want to execute some complex logic, you can do so by picking up invoke a stored procedure option. Okay. So in this particular integration, I want to insert a record into a table. So I'm going to select this operation. But how to use a database to the fullest potential or to do the bulk validations, we'll be covering it in detail when we do the FPDA integration. We'll be doing it in quite detail when we do the FPDA integration. Okay, so we will dedicate a full 1 hour session to talk about how to do the heavy transformations or validations. Now I'm going to say perform an operation on a table, and I would do an insert operation. And what's the table that we have created, guys, in ATP?
ICS underscore error.
Yeah, ICS underscore errors. We're going to insert a record into that table. Just give me one moment, guys. Give me one moment. Yeah, I'm just opening up SQL Developer, and let's connect to the ATP DB, guys. So there's a table called ICS errors that we have created. So we want to insert a record to that particular table. So I would say, so what's the username that we have used, guys? So what's the schema or user that we have used? It's admin schema. And I need to search for ICS errors table. Search for a table called ICS underscore errors. You move it to the selected list. Import it. Now, when you search for a table, guys, please note that don't search for it in small letters, guys. If you search for it in small letters, let me go ahead and show it to you. So if I say continue, let me go ahead and remove the table. I'll just take it off. Just want to show you that so fault details into ATP. And I would select insert operation. And if you select for table name by entering it in all small letters, guys, you will not be able to find the table name. So not sure why Oracle has put in that restriction, but when you search for a table, ensure that you search for it in by entering the table name in all capital letters. Select the table and move it to the selected list. Continue. Okay, we need to, after we move it to the selected list, we need to go ahead and click on import tables. So that would import the table definition into OIC. And then we go ahead and continue. Click on finish. Now what would happen, guys, since we have imported the table definition into OIC, you would be able to see the column details here. Now what fields do we have here, guys? We have instance ID, integration name, and the scope. So where can I pick up those details from, guys? Instance ID. Where can I pick up the integration name from? Integration name. And scope is going to be journal import. And we also need to map the fault code, fault reason, and the fault details. So since we are in a scope level fault handler, you get access to a fault object base. You get access to a fault object which is named after the scope. Expand it. You go ahead and map it. Validate. Okay. Now, what is it that we have done now? We have configured a scope level fault handler now. And from a scope level fault handler, we are inserting a record into ATPDB. And one important point, guys, within the integration, a scope is treated as a logical unit, guys. So if you get an exception within the scope, and if that exception is handled there, then OIC, and if you get an exception within a scope from that point of failure, whatever other actions that you have in a scope, so in this scope, after this node, whatever other actions you have, they will not be executed. Okay, so whether they are part of a same scope or a change scope doesn't matter, they will not be executed. But if when you get a fault, the control will go from here to the scope level fault handler. And in the scope level fault handler, this record insertion would be executed. And after that, we would have to, and whatever other actions that you have in the integration would still be populated or would still be executed. So just to prove to you this particular point, that if you have any further actions after the scope, they would be executed. To prove to you that point, I'm going to add a logger component. And what does a logger component help you with, guys? It would just help you to log a message to the activity stream. So I would say log the message always. I'm going to say that this message now will always be printed. Then you go ahead and save it. Now let's check the behavior of the integration. We go ahead and activate it. I'm going to make use of the same payload that I used earlier. I'll increment the batch identifier. And we still have that invalid ledger ID. We still have invalid ledger ID. And we are entering the OIC details here as a basic auth. Now we go ahead and fire off a request. Let's see if this service is up and running. So we've got back a response time. Going to observability, integrations, and we could see that a message is received just now. And if you look at this particular message, it has completed successfully. So this is point number one, guys. So if an integration completes in succeeded state, that does not mean it has always done its job. So it could also mean that there might have been an exception that occurred in that integration, and that fault would have been handled in a fault handler. And that fault would have been handled in a fault handler. Now you click on batch name equal to 4006. So when you click on a batch name, it's going to show you that activity stream. It's going to show you that activity stream. And what exactly you see here, you see that the integration is triggered. And from the scope, we're calling a journal import service. From the scope, we're calling a journal import service. And when you click on an error, it tells you what the exact error is. It's still the same error, invalid ledger. Now, what has happened? Whatever remaining actions that we have within the scope are not executed. So control went from here to the fault handler, and it went to the default handler. We were inserting a record to ATP table, right? So that insertion of record into ATP table was also done. Instance ID. You print the instance ID here, and you see the instance ID, integration name, integration scope. So this journal import scope has thrown that exception. And this is an error code, error reason, and the details. And what also has happened, guys, on this integration, we have got an exception here, but we handled it well. So the integration will proceed further and execute the remaining actions that we have. We had a logger component, you see green color, it clearly indicates that it is printed, right? Now, if you go in here, you see the logger message, you see it is already printed in the activity stream. So if you want to log something in the integration, you can go ahead and make use of this logger component as well. Okay. And sometimes, yes, this behavior, remember guys, is this behavior exactly same as in PLSQL, guys? So say, for example, if you're building a procedure, let's say you've got an exception here and you handled it here. Would the procedure go ahead and execute the remaining actions, guys? It would certainly do that, right? Until you have unless you have an exit statement or stop, it would still go ahead and execute the other blocks because you've got an exception here. It is handled here. So blocks would be treated as independent logical units. That's exactly the same case for scope as well, guys. So this behavior is absolutely fine in most cases. But sometimes what would happen, guys? Sometimes you would have a scenario wherein you don't want to execute the remaining parts of the integration when you get a fault in one scope. So when would that be the scenario, guys? Whenever there is a dependency between the scopes, right? So say, for example, if you're building an integration and in the integration, you're receiving customer details plus AR invoice details as input. You're receiving a customer details and AR invoice details as input. So what is it that you do? You trigger the integration, you have customer scope, and in the customer scope, you have logic to create customer. And after this, you have invoice scope, and in the invoice scope, you have logic to create AR invoice. And then you stop the integration. But tell me one thing is, if the customer creation fails, does it make sense to attempt to create AR invoice, guys? Can we create an invoice without a customer?
No.
Doesn't really make sense, right? So in this case, since there is a dependency between the scopes, we don't want to proceed with this. We don't want to proceed with this in case this errors out. In case this errors out, we don't want to proceed with this. Okay, so that's exactly what you see here. So how do you handle such scenarios? To handle such scenarios, what you can do is there are two things that you could do. Okay, I can go ahead and deactivate it. I can go ahead and within the scope fault handler, within the default handler. Now, what exactly do you do? From the scope, if you have got a fault, it gets captured in a fault handler, and here you're inserting a record, right? Now, when you insert a record into ATP table here, after the record is inserted, we don't want the integration to proceed further. So how do we do it? I can go ahead. Remember, since it is an asynchronous service, I cannot have a return element here. I cannot have a return element since it is an asynchronous service. and I can only add a stop node. I can only add a stop node. I can only add a stop node. Now, when you add a stop node, what would happen, guys? So yes, if you get a fault from within the scope, a record would be inserted to ATP table, and then we send the integration stops there. Integration stops then and there itself. Okay, it doesn't proceed further. So this is one option. Since it is an asynchronous, I can stop it. If it is asynchronous, instead of sending out a normal response, we'll see that I'll show it to you in the next integration. If it is asynchronous, you have a return element, right? If it is a return element, you can also send a fault return back to the calling client. Since it is an asynchronous one, since you have a stop node here, you can only stop it. We cannot send a response back. Okay, in synchronous, you can send it back, send a fault return back. Well, I'll show you how to do it in the next integration. So I can stop the integration if I want. That's one thing that I can do. And the other option that I have is I can also rethrow the fault. So when you rethrow the fault, what would happen, guys? So yes, you will get an exception from within the scope. It would be handled here. A record would be inserted to ATP, and the fault is rethrown back. And the fault is rethrown back. And but since this is outermost scope, when the fault is rethrown, to which node the fault will go? It would go to the global fault handler. So what would happen now? The behavior of the integration would be like, so yes, this node is going to throw the fault, and it's going to execute these two actions. It's going to insert a record to ATP table, and it's also going to rethrow the fault. And when the fault is rethrown, it would go to the global fault handler. Because since we are rethrowing a fault, the remaining actions in the integration will be skipped. The purpose solved, it would not be executed, and it would go to the global fault handler. And since we are sending a notification email would also be sent out. And since the fault is rethrown from here as well, the integration instance would complete in errored state. Integration instance would complete in errored state. Okay. Now, what exactly are we going to do now? We would go ahead and yeah, let's go ahead and test it, guys. I'm going to save the integration, activate it. So what should be the behavior? You would see that the record would be inserted. I'm going to activate it. Debug. So the service is activated, and after the service is activated, I would go ahead and test it. So you should be able to see two actions getting executed. I'm going to do a replace all, fire off a request. And after that, what do we do? Yes, we can monitor it from here. So you would notice that this particular instance has errored out. Let's see the flow. You see that we've got an error here. We've got an error here. And the remaining part of the integration is skipped. It went to the fault handler. And in the default handler, we were inserting a record to ATP table. We were inserting a record to ATP table. You see the record inserted to ATP table. And after the record is inserted to ATP table, we are rethrowing the fault from here. And when you rethrow the fault, since we are rethrowing the fault, did the remaining part of the integration get executed, guys? Yes or no, please?
No.
It is skipped because you see the dotted line. And since we have our fault rethrown from the outermost scope, it went to a global fault handler. And from the global fault handler, a notification was sent out. And since the fault is rethrown from global as well, the integration completed in error state. So if I open up the email account and let me show you that email, guys, it would be the same email that was sent out earlier. So this is a same, this is the error that we have got. So journal import failed for batch name 4007. And you see, dear user, journal import failed in ERP cloud, and you say, please find below details. And here we are printing the error details. Okay, and when we print the error details, we print the error code, reason, and the message, and you also have the hyperlink. So everything is it's the same behavior that we have seen earlier. So if you don't want the integration to proceed further, we can go ahead and rethrow the fault if you want. We can go ahead and rethrow the fault, or we can stop the integration. And sometimes what might happen is you might also want to raise some custom business exceptions. Can we do it in PLSQL, guys? So for example, if you're building any PLSQL package, can we raise a custom business exceptions which are applicable for those scenarios?
User-defined exception.
Yeah, user-defined exception. I can define an exception here and I can raise it within the PLSQL blocks. In exactly similar fashion, within the integration also, you can raise custom business faults. Now tell me one thing, guys. We are invoking journal import service here, and we are also submitting import journals here. And if I pass in, say, 10 lines as input to this, is this service going to validate the data, guys? Yes or no?
Yes.
That's exactly why we are getting the fault in first place. And so this service is going to do few validations, guys. And this import journals job that I'm submitting here is going to validate every other field. So please note that the standard services and the jobs that you submit would validate each and every field that you have in the input payload, guys. Each and every field that you have an input payload would be validated. Okay. Now, what else do we need to do? What else do we need to do? Apart from invoking the standard service and submitting a job, these two are going to do the validations anyways. But if you have a requirement to do some custom validations, which are not done by these two, okay, what could be one such example, guys? So for example, if client says, yeah.
Period not open, code combination not match.
All those things will be validated by these two. If period is not open, this itself is going to throw an error.
Okay.
And if code combination is not valid, this is going to throw an error.
Okay.
All those validations would be done. But if we have a custom validation, say for example, if HSBC says, Prasad, you need to import the journals only if source and category is equal to other. Okay, what is my requirement, guys? I need to import the journals only if the source is equal to other and category equal to other. Now tell me one thing, guys, it is not other here. Say the source is manual. Okay, will this not throw an exception, guys? Since manual is a valid journal source, it is not going to throw an exception, right? But what is the client saying? Client is saying that, Prasad, when you get journals from core banking system, ensure that the source and category is equal to other, only then import the journal here. Only then process that batch, otherwise raise a flag. So such custom validations that you want, if you want to do, which are not done by the standard service or the jobs that you are triggering, then you can, is it possible in OIC? We have an action called throw new fault, and this would help you in all such scenarios. So with the help of this action, what can you make out from the name, guys? You can throw a new business fault. Now, when you throw a fault, what exactly do we need to do, guys? So whether it is a standard fault raised by Oracle or whether it is a custom fault that you are raising, you need to initialize the fault object. Remember, guys, when I've got the email, what are the details that you see? You see error code, reason, and the message. You see error code, reason, and the message, right? Error code, reason, and the message. Message is nothing but the details. Okay, and you can also mention a skip condition as well. So in this error, what is it that I'm trying to do, guys? I'm going to say, we need to initialize the fault object with all these details. So I'm going to say invalid journal source or category. And I'm going to say journal source or category is invalid. And you cannot just keep saying that sorry boss, journal source and category is invalid. You also need to point towards the resolution, guys. So we should also say only journals of source other and category other would be processed. Okay. Now, after you add all these details, error code, reason, and the details, what else do we need to do, guys? We also can write in a condition here. But one very important point, guys. What is this condition, guys? It is a skip condition, meaning I can write a condition here, and when that condition is true, this fault will be skipped. When this condition is true, this fault will be skipped. Now I go into a skip condition. I go ahead and add a condition. What is it that I want to check, guys?
Source and category should be others.
Source and category should be others. So I'm selecting source and I say equal to, and I say other. And what else do we need to do? Just give me one moment, guys. So we also need to check if a category is also equal to other. Okay, so what is it that we are checking is since I'm using all of, you have and operator, and if you say any of, you have or operator. So what's the exact condition that we are checking? We are checking if journal source is equal to other and category equal to other. But remember one important point, guys. Tell me one thing. So I'm writing a condition here. So that means if this condition is true, the fault will be raised. Is that the case, guys?
No.
Absolutely no. Because whatever condition that you're configuring, what is it, guys? It is a skip condition. So meaning only if this condition is not true, the fault will be raised. If the condition is true, the fault will be skipped. Okay. So if source and category both equal to other, this fault would be skipped. And you can also raise, we can also mention this as validate journal source and category. Save it. Okay. So we're going to throw a new fault here. Now, yes, we would be throwing a new fault here. Would be throwing a new fault here. And this would throw a fault when source and category is not equal to other. Well, source, if source is equal to other and category equal to other, it would proceed further. The fault will not be raised. But if either of those conditions fail, the fault will be raised. But in terms of how the fault is handled, whether it is a standard fault raised by Oracle service or whether it is your custom fault, the behavior would still be the same. It would be handled by the default handler. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a couple of tests now. So if I test the integration with the same payload that we used earlier, meaning invalid ledger ID, and the source and category is equal to other. Let's see the behavior, guys. You see that it is in progress at the moment. And what's happening, guys? Get into it. It is not throwing a fault yet. But what is it that I want you guys to take note of as this green node here? So it did not raise a fault because both the source and category that I have used is equal to other. So this node did not raise a fault. Okay. So this node has errored out now. So if you see here, so this particular node has errored out, but this particular node has not raised a fault, and integration tried to import the patch. Okay, so the way this fault is handled, it's exactly the same as it happened earlier. Record inserted to ATP and fault notification sent out. Now let me do one final test. Shall we change the source or category to a different value, guys? I'm going to say ABC. You see that this particular integration instance has errored out. And which particular node has thrown a fault, guys? The first node, the throw new fault node itself has raised a fault. Why did this node raise a fault, guys, now? Because one of the condition is false. Source is equal to ABC, which is not true. So since the skip condition is false, this fault is raised. And this fault would have been inserted into ATP table. So if I search for this particular instance, in the ATP table, what exact error would you probably see? It would be the invalid journal source error that you see. Journal source or category is invalid. Only journal source or category is invalid. Only journals of source category, source other and category other would be processed. And that fault would have propagated to the global fault handler as well. And from here, a notification was sent out. So if I go back to the email, I would have received an email here. I should have received an email here. And what does it say? So in the email, we have the error details. So I think we have put in inverted commas there. That's where you see the difference. But the error details have been sent out. What is this fault, guys? It is a custom fault that we have raised as part of the integration using throw new fault action. So if required, you can go back and raise custom business faults here. And you can raise them, or you can have just one node doing the exception and doing the validation. You could also have this node repeated a number of times, raising different exceptions when different scenarios are not met. But you don't have to do any other standard validation space. It would be foolish if you start doing field by field validation like you normally do in EBS, okay? Because the standard service that you have and the import journals job that you kick off would anyways do those validations. Any questions, guys, from anyone?
Yeah, Prasad, see that table which you have given, that ICS errors. For example, if the table structure has been changed, you said we need to import the table, right?
Correct.
So,
Yeah,
for example,
you would
if I
have
add,
to, you have to re-import it.
okay, but it will change any of the mappings or it will remain the same?
No, all the other mappings would remain same. Say, for example, if you add one more column, right? Whatever mappings you have done will remain there. That new additional column will not have any mapping. So that column alone you need to map.
Okay.
But the assumption is you didn't change the column names of the existing ones. But if you change the column names also, then the mapping will be lost.
Okay, fine.
Okay. Any other questions, guys, from anyone? Okay, so we need to get started with the next integration, guys. Let's do it with a fresh mind tomorrow, guys. So we're going to get started with complex AP invoice REST API. And why is it complex? Because from this integration, I'm going to show you how to expose two REST endpoints, guys. One post REST endpoint to create AP invoice in ERP. And I'm also going to show you how to expose one GET endpoint, which would help us get AP invoice details. I'll set the context tomorrow and we'll go ahead and build it as well. Okay.
Prasad, one last thing. See, in this error handling which you have said, if the source and this one custom validation, what we have done, it is okay. But see, for example, the source is fine. At the line level, let us say due to any reason, 10 records are there, one got errored out, remaining things are fine.
Okay.
So how it will handle? Will that
in such
be the same way?
In such case, what you do was you are downloading the log and output files here, right? Using download ESS job execution details. Instead
Okay.
of that, what you do was you run a BAP report, and in that BAP report, you say select start from GN interface table, where group ID equal to so and so 4009, and status equal to error. So if out of 100 lines, if 10 lines have errors, so that 10 lines you extract with the help of a BAP report, and you send it as a CSV attachment. So the team would look at that, try to resolve what the issue was, and then they would try to re-import the batch. So if remember the journals, right? The journal needs to be balanced. So if you have problem with, even if you have problem with one debit line or one credit line in the journal, it cannot be imported because it becomes an imbalanced journal, right?
Okay.
So in such cases, what you do is you write a custom BAP report, and you get all the error records and you send it out as a CSV attachment. How to kick off a BAP report, we'll cover it in outbound for service.
Okay. Okay. Fine.
Okay. Thanks everyone. See you tomorrow.